Got this camera, I want this shot with this image, I want this lens on there. So very, very much like a director is today. And of course, at the end of it, he got the credit, photograph.
On a forgotten Civil War battlefield, buried beneath mud and time, something remarkable was uncovered. Not bones or bullets, but an old camera. Rusted, cracked, and covered in dirt, it looked like just another relic of history. But when experts carefully examined it, they realized this was no ordinary find. Inside were fragile glass plates, photographs frozen in time that revealed haunting images no one expected.
The Union soldiers on the other side until more Union soldiers showed up behind them, and the slaughter over here was just terrible.
Scenes too raw, too chilling, too real for the history books. What this camera captured more than 150 years ago has left historians, researchers, and even battlefield archaeologists utterly horrified. Join us in this video as we unveil these findings from the old Civil War camera. The day war's horror reached the public. In October 1862, a shocking event occurred in New York City. Matthew Brady, already a famous photographer, entrepreneur, and showman, unveiled a haunting new exhibit that would forever change how Americans viewed the Civil War. The photographs weren't of soldiers in action or brave charges across the battlefield. The technology of the time couldn't capture such moments. Instead, the images his assistant, Alexander Gardner, brought back from Antietam showed something far more chilling: the aftermath. Viewers walked into Brady's gallery expecting familiar portraits of generals or patriotic scenes. What they saw instead were rows of bloated bodies and grim burial pits. The display was called "The Dead of Antietam," and it hit the public like a thunderbolt. The New York Times wrote that Brady had done something almost unthinkable. If he has not brought bodies and laid them in our dooryards and along the streets, he has done something very like it. Crowds gathered in silence, staring into the pale faces of the fallen soldiers, trapped by what the paper called the strange spell that dwells in dead men's eyes. The darkened second-floor gallery became a place where war's terrible truth was laid bare. For the first time, the public wasn't just reading about battles. They were forced to confront what those battles left behind. Although many photographers rushed to document the war, none left a greater mark than Brady and Gardner. Brady himself was already a giant in the field. These were the kind of photographs that were later found to be buried deep in the battlefield. So, how did the man behind these horrifying photographs make his way to the top? Keep watching to find out. The early life and rise of Matthew Brady. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Matthew Brady left behind few details about his life before photography. In his later years, when speaking to the press, he gave varying accounts of his birth, saying he was born between 1822 and 1824 in Warren County, New York, near Lake George. He was the youngest of 3 children born to Irish immigrant parents, Andrew and Samantha Julia Brady. Yet, in official documents filed before and during the American Civil War, Brady curiously claimed that he had been born in Ireland. At just 16, Brady moved to Saratoga, New York, where fate led him to meet the portrait painter William Page. Brady became Page's student, and in 1839, the two traveled first to Albany and then onward to New York City. There, Brady studied painting under Page and also under Samuel Morse, Page's former teacher. Morse, who had met Louis-Jacques Daguerre in France in 1839, returned to America eager to spread the new invention of daguerreotype photography. Brady's earliest connection to this groundbreaking art form was modest. He manufactured leather cases to hold the delicate daguerreotype images. Yet, his growing fascination with the medium drew him into the heart of New York's small but vibrant artistic colony, where early photography was taking root. Morse eventually opened a studio and began teaching the daguerreotype process, and Brady was among his first eager students. In 1844, Brady opened his own photography studio at the corner of Broadway and Fulton Street in New York City. By 1845, he was already exhibiting portraits of prominent Americans, including Senator Daniel Webster and writer Edgar Allan Poe. His reputation grew quickly. In 1849, Brady expanded his reach by opening another studio at 625 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. where he met Juliet Handy, affectionately called Julia, whom he married in 1850. The couple settled on Staten Island, but Brady's focus remained firmly on his photographic career. His earliest works were daguerreotypes, for which he won numerous awards. As photographic technology evolved, Brady evolved with it. By the 1850s, ambrotypes had risen in popularity, only to be surpassed by the albumen print, paper photographs produced from large glass negatives, which would dominate the Civil War era. Brady embraced these advances and, in 1850, produced The Gallery of Illustrious Americans, a portrait collection featuring notable figures of the day, including a haunting image of the aging Andrew Jackson at his Hermitage estate. While the project was not financially successful, it significantly elevated Brady's reputation as a serious artist and innovator. By 1854, the photographic world was revolutionized yet again when French photographer André-Adolphe Eugène Disdéry popularized the carte de visite, small photographic portraits the size of visiting cards. This new format swept through Europe and the United States, becoming a wildly popular novelty. Thousands of carts were produced, bought, and traded, bringing photography into the lives of ordinary people in a way never before seen. Brady, always inventive and ambitious, seized on these trends while also pioneering bold marketing strategies. In 1856, he placed an advertisement in the New York Herald, offering to produce photographs, ambrotypes, and daguerreotypes. What made the ad revolutionary was not just its content, but its design. Brady experimented with distinctive fonts and typefaces that stood out from the rest of the paper and from other advertisements. This approach, unheard of at the time, was among the earliest examples of modern advertising techniques in the United States. By the eve of the Civil War, Matthew Brady had already positioned himself as one of the most prominent photographers in America. His mastery of evolving techniques, eye for artistry, and keen business instincts would soon intersect with history in ways that would forever change how war and the human cost of it were remembered. Was it really the Civil War that took Matthew Brady's photography business to the next level? Let's find out. Brady and the Civil War. At the outset of the Civil War, Matthew Brady's photography business experienced a surge in demand. Departing soldiers and their families flocked to his studio, eager to purchase cartes de visite as keepsakes before their loved ones marched off to uncertain fates. Brady understood the emotional urgency of this market. In one advertisement he placed in the New York Daily Tribune, he warned families with chilling foresight, "You cannot tell how soon it may be too late." For many, these small portraits became the last tangible reminder of a son, brother, or husband lost to the war. Yet Brady's ambitions extended far beyond portraits. He envisioned something far more daring, the documentation of the war itself. Initially, he applied to his old friend, General Winfield Scott, for permission to send photographers into the field. Eventually, Brady took his case directly to President Abraham Lincoln, who granted him approval in 1861, but with one crucial condition. Brady had to finance the entire undertaking himself. This decision would define Brady's legacy. So, what other intriguing sights were captured on the Civil War battlefield? Stay tuned to find out. The lonely death of a sharpshooter. On the edges of the Gettysburg battlefield, long after the fighting had ended, a burial party stumbled across a chilling sight. Hidden away in a secluded spot lay the body of a sharpshooter, exactly as he had fallen when the bullet struck him down. His cap and rifle had been thrown behind him by the force of the impact, and a glimpse of his blanket revealed he had turned this place into a deadly hideout, a place he thought he could fight from, perhaps even survive. But he never left. His skeleton was found just as death claimed him, frozen in that final lonely position. And while this man was discovered, many others like him were not. Across old battlefields, countless sharpshooters' remains were left scattered in hidden crevices, between rocks, or buried by time itself. Some visitors, even years later, would stumble upon bones bleaching in the sun, yet hundreds more vanished into the soil, their names and stories forever lost. The sharpshooters of the Civil War were a different breed of soldier. Chosen for their unmatched accuracy, Some could shoot the flame off a candle at 100 yards. They were deadly specialists, armed with finely crafted rifles, often choosing their own positions far ahead of the main lines. Some climbed trees and tied themselves to branches so they wouldn't fall if hit. Others hid behind rocks, logs, or in small pits they dug themselves, vanishing into the landscape as silent predators. Their duels could be terrifyingly personal. At times, a Union and Confederate sharpshooter would find themselves locked in a deadly standoff, each waiting for hours, each tricking the other with decoys like hats raised on sticks or flashes of powder meant to draw fire. The smallest mistake meant instant death. At places like Vicksburg and Richmond, these hidden marksmen became ghosts of the battlefield, sniping at officers from hiding places so well concealed they seemed impossible to root out. For men like the sharpshooter found at Gettysburg, their chosen ground became their grave. But was this all? Let's find out. The Sharpshooter's Last Watch. On July 4, 1863, as Lee's shattered army limped away from Gettysburg, the battlefield it left behind was a scene of unimaginable ruin. From Culp's Hill on the right to the shadowed forests near Round Top on the left, the land was littered with wreckage. Confederate dead and wounded lay scattered across the fields, broken cannons and shattered caissons stood silent, and the remains of an army in retreat marked the ground in every direction. When an artist passed through this desolate landscape, he came upon a hidden spot that froze him in his tracks. Tucked away between two massive rocks, he discovered the covert of a Confederate sharpshooter. The soldier had built a crude stone wall, carefully stacking rocks to create a deadly fortress. From its crevices, he had spent his final hours picking off Union officers with a cold precision. But the battle had not left him untouched. The rock walls surrounding his hideout bore the scars of counterfire, white pockmarks from bullets, splintered trees nearby, and branches torn apart in the desperate effort to silence him. The sharpshooter never escaped. A fragment from an exploding shell had struck him in the head. On his blanket, he had collapsed, and there he waited for death. No one could know how long he lingered, whether he slipped into delirium or lay conscious, haunted by visions of home. The disarray of his clothing hinted at agony, at suffering stretched across cruel hours. Did he hear voices in his mind, familiar and dear, calling to him as the world around him turned silent? Did he see the faces of those he loved, while his strength ebbed away beneath the roar of cannon fire fading into the distance? Months later, on November 19th, the same artist returned to Gettysburg for the consecration of the cemetery. Drawn back to the lonely hiding place, he found the sharpshooter's home unchanged. The soldier's musket, rusted and eaten by rain, still leaned against the rock. The body had not been buried. The uniform, now rotting, still clung to the skeleton where it lay, just as it had on that July day. Among the countless men laid to rest, no one had discovered him. He had been overlooked, forgotten, left to the mercy of storms. Somewhere far away, a family likely waited. His name listed as missing, his fate unknown. Perhaps a mother still looked for her son's return, unaware that his bones remained hidden, unclaimed, between two silent rocks at Gettysburg. But when the photographs of the sharpshooter began to draw attention, what happened? Stay tuned to find out. The manipulated death scene. In the years that followed, historians began to look closer at the famous sharpshooter photographs. Among them was William Frasanito, who carefully studied 6 different images of the same body, taken in July 1863 by photographers Alexander Gardner and Timothy O'Sullivan. What he discovered shook the foundation of what many believed about those haunting scenes. By analyzing the rocky terrain and landmarks captured in the images, Frasanito concluded that 4 of the photographs had been taken on the southern slope of Devil's Den, while only 2 showed the so-called Sharpshooter's Den. That meant the story of the lone marksman dying in his hidden stone nest wasn't quite what it appeared to be. In truth, Frasanito argued, the soldier had likely been an ordinary infantryman, cut down while charging up the hillside. After taking several photographs of the body from different angles, Gardner and O'Sullivan seem to have found a more dramatic backdrop 40 yards away. They then moved the corpse into the rocky crevice, arranging him in what became one of the most enduring images of Gettysburg. The evidence pointed to deliberate staging. In one version of the photograph, a blanket can be seen beneath the soldier's body, possibly the very cloth used to drag him into place. Even the weapon beside him raised suspicion. It was not the type of rifle carried by sharpshooters, but rather a gun that appeared in multiple Gardner photographs, likely kept as a prop to make the scenes more convincing. The amount of time spent on this one corpse suggested something more. Gardner may have lingered because, by then, most of the dead had already been buried. This body, left exposed on the field, became one of his last opportunities to capture the raw image of death. Gardner later claimed that he returned to the site 4 months later, during the dedication of Gettysburg's cemetery, and found the body still untouched. But Frasanito dismissed this account as impossible. Scavengers combed the battlefields relentlessly, stripping them of relics, and no corpse would have been left to rot in plain sight for so long. Yet Gardner's tale, and the photographs themselves, achieved what facts alone could not. By moving the soldier and embellishing his story, he transformed an anonymous casualty into a tragic character. In the public eye, this man was no longer just one of thousands who fell at Gettysburg. He became the image of a sharpshooter's lonely death, a symbol of suffering, pain, and abandonment that echoed long after the war. So, who was the man behind the sharpshooter's photography? Keep watching to find out. Alexander Gardner, the man behind the lens. Among the names forever tied to Civil War photography, Alexander Gardner stands out. Born in Scotland in 1821, Gardner never began life as an artist of death, but rather as an apprentice jeweler. His path changed in 1851 when he visited the Great Exhibition in London. There, he encountered the work of American photographer Matthew Brady. Something in Brady's images lit a spark. Gardner abandoned his early trade, driven instead to join the evolving world of photography. It was likely Brady himself who paid for Gardner's passage to the United States. By 1858, Gardner had been placed in charge of Brady's Washington, D.C. studio. His skill and management were invaluable, and as the clouds of war gathered, photography surged in demand. Soldiers flocked to studios, anxious to leave behind portraits for loved ones before marching off to uncertain fates. Gardner quickly became one of the most sought-after photographers for these hauntingly final keepsakes. When the first great clash erupted at Manassas, Virginia, Brady recognized that history had to be captured in real time. He hired a team of photographers, Gardner among them, and equipped them with traveling darkrooms, horse-drawn wagons filled with chemicals, glass plates, and fragile equipment. With these rolling laboratories, men like Gardner could capture and develop photographs directly in the field. Gardner's lens recorded the horrors at Antietam, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, and Petersburg, cementing his place as one of the war's most important visual witnesses. But Gardner soon grew restless under Brady's shadow. After Antietam, he broke away to work independently, charting his own course in the war's bloody wake. His images carried a weight few others achieved. Where Brady sought fame, Gardner delivered unflinching reality. It was Gardner's camera that captured one of the final photographs of Abraham Lincoln, only weeks before the president's assassination. And when the conspirators who plotted Lincoln's assassination were hanged, Gardner was there, recording their last moments in chilling detail. His career did not end with war. In 1867, Gardner was appointed official photographer for the Union Pacific Railroad. His lens followed the iron tracks westward through Kansas, documenting not only the monumental engineering effort, but also the Native American tribes encountered along the way. Later, in 1871, he walked away from photography altogether, turning to insurance work until his death in 1882. Today, Gardner's legacy remains scattered. Because so much of his early work appeared under Brady's name, his individual contributions were long overlooked. Many of his images survive within Brady's Civil War collection, cataloged as Matthew Brady Photographs of Civil War-era Personalities and Scenes. Yet his independent achievements are undeniable. In 1866, he published Gardner's photographic sketchbook of the war, a 2-volume work that remains one of the most important visual records of the conflict. His later portraits of native delegations to Washington, D.C., now preserved at the National Archives, further testify to his enduring skill. Alexander Gardner began as an apprentice jeweler and ended his life as an insurance man. But between those chapters, he held a camera that forced Americans to confront the war as it truly was: bloody, merciless, and unforgettable. Now, what gave rise to battlefield photography? Let's find out. The birth of battlefield photography. The story of Civil War photography cannot be told without first looking back at how the medium itself was born. In 1839, the daguerreotype process was introduced to the public. Named after its inventor, Frenchman Louis-Jacques Mandé Daguerre, and created in collaboration with Joseph Nicéphore Niepce, it captured images on metal plates. That very same year, across the English Channel, William Henry Fox Talbot announced his own photographic process, one that relied on paper negatives and prints. These early breakthroughs would set the stage for a revolution in how humanity recorded itself. By the late 1850s, the collodion process had surpassed the daguerreotype in popularity. A glass plate would be coated in a sticky solution, sensitized, quickly exposed, and then developed and fixed. This wet plate collodion method was cumbersome. It required speed, precision, and chemicals at hand, but it allowed for multiple positive prints to be made from a single negative. At the same time, new formats emerged for mass distribution. Families cherished ambrotypes, images fixed onto glass, and tintypes, photographs preserved on thin iron plates. Equally popular was the carte de visite, a small portrait glued to paper stock, easily shared and collected. For the first time in history, the faces of ordinary people could be preserved and exchanged on a scale never before possible. By the outbreak of the Civil War, photography had shed much of its early reputation as a questionable trade and had become a respected profession. Journals, societies, and organizations devoted to the medium gave it legitimacy, while studios flourished across the country. In the South, cities like Richmond became important centers of the craft, with galleries such as William A. Pratt's Virginia Gallery drawing notice. Traveling photographers also roamed the countryside, setting up temporary shops to serve towns and soldiers. The North, however, produced the names that would become legends. Matthew Brady, already a celebrity before the war, assembled the first organized team of field photographers. He published images in albums and stereographs that stunned the public. Among his protégés was Alexander Gardner, who eventually broke away to form his own studio in late 1862, joined by Timothy O'Sullivan and others. Meanwhile, New York's Edward and Henry T. Anthony dominated as the nation's largest publishers and distributors of photographic prints. Other figures like A.J. Russell, the official photographer of the United States military railroads, focused their lenses on the Union's logistical backbone. Southern photographers struggled under harsher conditions. In the early months of the war, men such as J.D. Edwards and the team of Osborne and Durbeck attempted to document the Confederacy in images. But the Union blockade quickly crippled Southern commerce. Prices skyrocketed, resources vanished, and the already fragile industry collapsed. By 1862, Humphrey's Journal grimly reported that the photographic art down south has completely died out in consequence of war. A few resisted the decline. George S. Cook of South Carolina is remembered as one of the very few Southern photographers who managed to create and sell stereographs throughout the war's bloody duration. This was the world in which Civil War photography took root. Fragile glass plates, portable darkrooms, chemicals that burned skin and eyes, and men risking their lives to preserve death on camera. The technology was young, imperfect, and dangerous, but it was powerful enough to immortalize the war in ways that words alone could never match. What was it like when photographers followed soldiers into the battlefield? Stay tuned to find out more. Cameras followed the soldiers into battle. In May 1861, Richmond photographer Charles R. Rees placed an ad in the Richmond Dispatch, offering his finely executed photographs and ambrotypes. At the start of the war, soldiers flocked to studios like his, eager to capture their images in crisp new uniforms before heading off to what many still believed would be a brief adventure. As the conflict dragged on, photographers followed the armies into camps and closer to the battlefields, their cameras turning from staged portraits to the chaos and aftermath of war itself. The appetite for such images was enormous. A July 1862 issue of the Richmond Whig urged local photographers to visit battle sites and record fortifications, camps, and battlefields. These photographs, the paper insisted, would serve as invaluable illustrations of history. Yet capturing these scenes was no easy task. Early photographic technology was bulky, temperamental, and far too slow to catch the instant chaos of charging men or exploding shells. Instead, photographers captured landscapes, camp life, and the haunting stillness that followed combat. Despite these limitations, historian Bob Zeller later remarked that Civil War photography far exceeded those of any other war in the 19th century. There were, however, rare moments when cameras caught live battle. In the fall of 1863, photographers documented naval operations in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. George S. Cook achieved something extraordinary. Under fire himself, he captured 2 verified live-action photographs of Union gunboats in combat. Meanwhile, Philip Haas and Washington Peale recorded the clash of 5 Monitor-class ironclads alongside the massive USS New Ironsides. These daring efforts were the first genuine attempts to freeze battle in motion, a feat nearly impossible at the time. More often, however, the most enduring images came after the guns fell silent. During the war, photographers documented unburied soldiers only 7 times: at Antietam, Corinth, 2nd Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, and in the aftermath of Fredericksburg and Petersburg. These grim images shocked the public. The poet Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., upon viewing the Antietam photographs in 1863, urged readers to look upon them as the truest lesson in war's reality. He described the bodies, wrecks of manhood thrown together in careless heaps or ranged in ghastly rows for burial, as a jarring confrontation with the brutality of combat. For Holmes, the photographs delivered a stark truth. War was not noble or glorious, but repulsive, brutal, sickening, hideous. Virginia, especially, became a stage for many of these photographs. From A.J. Russell's 1863 image of Confederate officers along the Rappahannock River to Timothy O'Sullivan's iconic 1864 Grant's Council of War at Massaponax Church, the landscapes of Virginia became inseparable from the war's photographic record. Yet Southern studios, battered by shortages and the Union blockade, struggled to survive. By September 1863, the American Journal of Photography reported that only Charleston and perhaps Richmond still produced photographs at all. Even so, not every photograph told the unvarnished truth. Photographers often manipulated their subjects to create dramatic scenes. Historian Alan Trachtenberg explained that photographers sometimes staged daily life in camp, arranged soldiers for more compelling group shots, or even repositioned corpses for greater emotional impact. So, after the Civil War, what happened to these photographs? Were they preserved or discarded? Let's find out. After the guns fell silent, the fate of Civil War photography. When the Civil War finally ended, the photographs that had so vividly captured its horrors faced an uncertain future. During the war, these images had shocked, educated, and even haunted those who saw them. But once peace returned, the public appetite for battlefield carnage began to fade, leaving photographers to wonder what place their work would hold in a country eager to move forward. In 1866, 2 significant attempts were made to preserve the war's story through both pictures and words. George N. Barnard published photographic views of Sherman's campaign, while Alexander Gardner released his now famous Gardner's Photographic Sketchbook of the American Civil War. Both volumes were ambitious, carefully produced, and emotionally powerful. Yet at the time, their success was limited. As historian Alan Trachtenberg observed, the books resemble each other in their unqualified support of the Union and their undisguised hatred of slavery and Southern aristocracy. Gardner's collection, in particular, dedicated its first 18 plates to Virginia sites that had become etched into the nation's memory. Among them, the Marshall House in Alexandria, where Union Colonel Elmer Ellsworth was assassinated, and the deeply scarred entrenchments at Yorktown. Still, despite their historical and cultural weight, neither Barnard nor Gardner reaped great financial reward from these monumental efforts. Even the most recognized photographer of the era, Matthew Brady, found himself in dire straits after the war. Brady, who had become a household name for his photographic documentation of soldiers and battlefields, was left heavily in debt. The nation that had consumed his images in newspapers, albums, and stereographs now seemed to turn its back on him. Desperate, Brady petitioned the U.S. Congress multiple times, pleading with them to purchase his extensive collection of negatives. For years, his requests went unanswered, and the photographer who had once defined America's visual memory of the war slipped deeper into financial ruin. Finally, in 1875, Congress agreed to pay $25,000 for his archive, a vast and invaluable record of the conflict. Today, those negatives are preserved in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., serving as one of the most significant visual legacies of the war. What had begun as experimental photography on makeshift battlefields ultimately transformed into a permanent national memory. Though many of the men behind the cameras faded into obscurity, their work became the foundation for how future generations would understand the Civil War, not just as lines in a history book, but as raw, unforgettable images of suffering, loss, and endurance. What are your thoughts about the Civil War photography? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.